While the spiritual feast continues, let's just bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father in heaven, as we hear Pastor Chris's story this evening, may you be glorified. Because the whole point of knowing you is to be changed by you, because we know you and because we love you. And so my prayer is that we will be encouraged by Chris's testimony tonight, that his story will strengthen our faith, and so that our story with you can continue to be a growing, loving relationship with you. Bless Pastor Chris. Open our ears and our hearts and our minds to receive your word tonight. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amazing facts change lives.
It started out with them wanting me to go to the doctor to help get them drugs. And, you know, I'm noticing they're going to the doctor, they're coming back with like 60 pills, and they're selling these pills for like $1,000. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a lot of money I'm giving these people, so I'm just going to start selling it myself. The problem with that was we had all this money, but we was absolutely miserable. She would go out and sleep with other guys to get drugs, and that ended my marriage. But during this time, I have to get a job to build back up to where I was at, to open my shop again. So I get a job at Food City, and when I get this job at Food City, there's my wife now, Rebecca. She's a cashier there, and when I walk in, she's the most beautiful girl I've ever seen in my life. I was like, man, I could never have a girl like that. Wow, she's so beautiful. But as I'm working with her, she's actually kind of mean to me. And she's saying, I don't want anything to do with you, get away from me, stuff like that. But, you know, I just keep being nice to her and keep trying to give her my phone number. And it's around Christmas Eve. We'd just been dating for a little while and moved in together. My ex-wife shows up with my 3 children that I had by her. And she's like, here's your kids, here's their birth certificates, here's their social security cards, I'm done. And we're starting a family. We already have 3 kids. During this time, we spent the next year watching nothing but amazing facts on YouTube. I didn't even know they even had a website at this time. I just knew that this little guy on YouTube was super smart, was teaching Bible, and I wanted to follow him. I wanted to be a Christian. I gave my life to God now because of these truths that I'm learning from Doug Batchelor. Just because Doug taught it didn't make me real sure about going to this church. I really didn't want anything to do with it, but I called the guy up and I'm telling him, and I'm not very nice about it actually. I'm telling him, look, we was thinking about coming to your church, and he's really nice, and he's like, well, you're more than welcome to. We'd like to have you come. And I'm like, well, hold on, I'm going to lay down some ground rules. I'm telling him, I said, look here, I'm covered in tattoos, and I'm a tattoo artist. And he don't say, well, you know, wow, I didn't know all that, don't come to my church. He says, you're more than welcome. We would love to have you. Please come. He asked me what I want to do, and I said, well, I want to preach. I said, I have all these truths, I have all this knowledge, stuff I'd never known before, stuff if I'd have had when I was younger that would have been life-changing to me. I said, I got to share this with the world. I said, I want to preach, I want to teach. He gives me the book, says study that. Well, now that I'm a Bible worker, I'm able to go reach people that most of the normal churches wouldn't even bother to even speak to. I'm able to go out and reach the people who have lived the life that I've lived. I'm able to let them know that I am like you. I've been there. I've done that. I want to show you what my life is like now. I want to teach you this Bible. I want to show you what Jesus can do for you. It's not too late.
All right, let's fill in the gaps. And Damien's really good about searching the internet and getting pictures and things. And checking out all about me. He should be a private detective. I come in here and I'm like, man, yeah, that was in a magazine. I recognize that picture. Where'd you get that? So Damien's in here snooping around. Okay, so I'm going to share my testimony with you guys, and sometimes it's a little hard to share because life wasn't always the greatest in the world. So we're going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to talk about my hatred of God and why I hated God. And so my childhood, we're going to start there, was not the easiest in the world. My mother was very abusive. She's still alive. We don't speak. Don't really fool with her. But my mother abused me and my sister both physically, mentally, and sexually. And so we started life off not very well, and we both took different roads, and she also psychologically pitted me and my sister against each other, so me and my sister don't talk. So I really don't have a whole lot of family really at all. My dad was never around. I speak to him now, and I see him now, but growing up, I was kind of left alone just to be beat, just to be abused in every way possible. My earliest memory is one that really caught me when I sat down and, they asked me to write a book, and I started working on it. And then when you start trying to write your life out, things that you had forgotten about starts flooding back in. My earliest memory was when I was young. I remember my mother bought me this water bed to put in my room, and it was the old school water bed, the one you run the water hose to, and you got to wait for it to fill up, and it takes like overnight to do, and then you can it's like a boat. You can just rock and go on it. And those didn't last too long in history because they'd either bust and flood somebody's house or something. But I had one of those, and they had a mirror in the headboard. And so they got it filled up, and I slept on it. The next morning I woke up, I'm like 5 years old, maybe 6, and I start doing flips on this bed and getting it all wavy, and I flipped and kicked into the mirror. And I knew that I had messed up, that I had to face the wrath of my mother, that it was going to be bad. So when she got up and she seen the broken mirror, she asked me what had happened. I told her that my sister, who was a year younger than me, come in my room and was flipping on my bed and broke my mirror. She immediately grabbed my dad's mining belt and commenced to beating my sister. And my sister, I'm sitting in there as a little kid, and I'm feeling so horrible because she's taking the beating that I was supposed to get. And she's saying, please, Mommy, I didn't do it. Please, I'm sorry, please. And she's like, just admit it. And she's like, I didn't. And I guess finally my mother had beat her enough that she realized if she had actually did it, she would eventually said she did. So that's one of the worst things I did even as a kid at 6 years old. But I took the beating that followed afterward, which is double what I probably would have got. And so that's the first memory that I had that popped into my head when I started writing, was taking that beating. I took quite a few beatings throughout. I missed a lot of school because I was always sick while I waited for some of the bruising. And I guess in the 70s they didn't have the welfare like they have today to protect people, and nobody really said anything in the small town of Gilbert. I have one person that was my hero that would rescue me sometimes, and that was my grandfather, Jesse Hatfield. And so Leighton is what he went by. So my grandfather was my hero. I remember one time I had been beat pretty bad, and he come to my bedroom window because his brother lived beside of my mom and dad. And he taught me how to open the window. I probably wasn't 6 or 7, and he kidnapped me. And that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, is to have him kidnap me. He was like a father with me. Anytime I was around, I'd beg to stay with him. I don't know why nobody protected kids back then. They just didn't. You just took whatever was thrown at you. And I'm not saying I was whipped. I was beat. We would be striped from head to toe. Didn't matter where it landed. And we'd be bruised from head to toe. So as I got older and went through all that, and my parents never got better. From pretty much like 15 on, I was on my own and just pretty well took care of myself. Now, my parents were very wealthy because my dad owned a car dealership and had worked in the coal mines. So I had physical things. I just didn't have nobody in the world, and I was kind of left to my own devices. So I didn't really have anybody besides my grandfather. He was everything to me. I mean, it still kills me today that he's gone, but I look forward to the resurrection now so that I can see him again. But that's the only buddy I ever had in my life, and now he's gone. And because of that, it caused me a lot of psychological problems. Like, I don't trust anybody. I don't have any real close friends. Maurice is one of the few people that I would actually trust to have a conversation with, to share something personal. So he means, your pastor means that much to me. So it caused me a lot of problems. I was really raised a lot of Cain when I was a teenager. Another big heartbreak was at 16. I had a girlfriend that I loved more than anything, and she got pregnant and had my first son. I didn't know in the meantime, she was a very poor girl, and her parents were not the most intelligent people in the world, but I didn't know that my mom was calling them and threatening them that we're taking that child, and you're never going to see it. So what did they do? They upped and moved in the middle of the night. And because my parents had piles of money, they thought this may be possible, so they moved. And for the first 7 years of my son's life, I got to see him born at the hospital, and at the hospital, that's when her dad looked at me and said, take a good look, we're leaving tonight, you're never going to see that baby again. So until he died, when my oldest son, and by the way, I was young, so his name's Shelby, and so, until he was 7 years old, I didn't get to see him until her dad died, and then it was only because I had become wealthy. But let's back up a little bit to that. That was another big tragedy in my life. My whole life has just felt like one big tragedy after another. And so I lost my girlfriend, I lost my son, I had a nervous breakdown, and at 16 years old, I'm having a nervous breakdown. And you know who was getting the blame for all this? God, yeah. I mean, if God's so good, then why would he allow a child to suffer so much? Why did I have to go through all the things I went through? And even when I turned like 16 and was taking care of myself, my parents by this time, they had become drug addicts and lost everything they owned. And so Oxycontin come onto the scene, and they were using Oxycontin. So the Harleys, the Mustangs, the everything was gone. It was all traded for dope. And the more they used, the more it got up. And so then they started stealing things from me to be able to support their drugs. So I had to get away from them. So soon as I turned 17, the first thing I did was enlist into the Marine Corps. Not because I wanted to be a Marine, but because I wanted to get out of there. It was my only escape, my ticket out of there. And so after the Marine Corps, while we were in the Marines, this is how I became a tattoo artist. I always liked to draw and was talented in that and could do cartoon characters and things like that. So we went off base, me and my buddy Johnson, after we finally had some freedom, and the government still owned us, but he wanted to get a tattoo, and he wanted property of USMC tattooed across his butt cheeks. And then it just caught my eye because I was always thinking logically, and it just caught my eye because the tattoo artist charged him $500 for that. And he worked like an hour and a half just coloring in some letters on this dude's butt. Property of USMC. I mean, the USMC was kind of pretty good size, but still, $500 for an hour and a half's work. So when I got out of the Marine Corps, the first thing I'm thinking is, how much does it cost to do a tattoo? And how much money is this guy's making? It costs like $5 to do a tattoo plus your time. And I thought, this is the life for me. So what did I do? I ordered some tattoo machines, and I began practicing a little bit, and started doing tattoos out of my house. I come out, and let me back up a little bit, because usually my wife likes me to have this structured so I keep everything in order, because of my ADHD, my brain goes a million miles a minute, and I got a million things going on. So while I was in the Marine Corps, I decided to start a business in there. And so anyways, I decided that it would be a good idea that if I go to the PX and I buy candy bars and tobacco products and I sell it to the recruits who are not allowed to have it. So I was selling Snickers bars for $5 a piece, and I was buying them for like 10 cents a piece. And I was selling tobacco products for $20 a piece, and I was buying them for practically nothing. And then finally, this is how I ended up getting out of the Marines. I ended up getting arrested, and I wasn't smart enough. I was young, so I wasn't smart enough not to be sticking all the money in the bank. So every Sunday, the banks are open on Sundays on military bases. So every Sunday, while other people were going to the bank to withdraw money, I was depositing. I didn't need their paycheck. I was making more selling candy bars. All day long, I was meeting with different recruits and selling them candy bars. And so I had quite a bit of money saved up, and I got flagged. And it wasn't actually a crime per se to sell candy bars and tobacco. The crime is in avoiding the taxes. And so anyways, I got offered a deal. I take a medical discharge, and I'm free to go. And that was without a promise that the federal government wouldn't press charges. But I did file my taxes that year and paid taxes on all the money, just in case. So I was smart enough to do that. I don't know if they would have come after me or not. But I had a pile of money when I come home. So I bought a trailer and bought tattoo equipment and was set up to live on my own. And still, I didn't have anybody. And so I finally got a job. Well, first of all, my ex-wife came over and wanted a tattoo, and she ended up offering me other favors during that time, and me being a single young man, I took those favors, and she ended up pregnant. So I did the right thing, and I married her, and her family was a drug addict family. Matter of fact, most of southern West Virginia, eastern Kentucky is riddled with drugs, and there's no future there, there's no jobs, there's no economy. And that's one reason why I'm leaving West Virginia, because a lot of the state is like that. There's just no future. There's nothing for my kids to grow up to except getting high. And so I met this girl, and I got a job at the local tattoo shop. And the guy hired me, and I got 30% of every tattoo I did. So if I did a $100 tattoo and it took me 2 hours, I made $30, which is still good money. And I rented the biggest apartment in Williamson, and it was right up above the tattoo shop. There was like 5 apartments underneath, and the whole 3rd floor was my apartment. The owner of the building had actually built it for him to live on the top floor, but he decided to build a house instead. So now this big, huge apartment, I tell you, this apartment was so big, if you had to use the bathroom, you'd just hold it. Because it was a march, way 4 apartments down to get to the single bathroom that this dude had put in it. And the bathroom's about half the size of this sanctuary in this thing. And so I was thought, man, this is it. I'm arrived. I don't need God. God can kiss my hind end, and He's never did anything for me. I hate God. And so I started working at the tattoo shop, and then I got lucky, and well, you can call it luck or unluck. The tattoo artist that I was working for that owned the business, he started having an affair on his wife. And his wife come in and caught him in the back room with another woman, and she was fit to be tied, of course. That's usually the normal reaction when your spouse is cheating on you. And so he tells me to run the tattoo shop until he figures something out. And he says, I'll pay you half, 50%, keep everything going. So now I'm making more money. I'm thinking, this is good. I'm having a good time going to the bar every night. I've got my new wife, got my new daughter. Everything's going good. And finally, he comes over like 2 weeks after that, and he says, let me sell you a tattoo shop. And I said, I don't have any money. And he says, how much do you got? I said, I got $500. He said, $500 it is. You just bought yourself a tattoo shop. And you're talking thousands of dollars worth of equipment. I made $1,000 that night and got the $500 back because I was now keeping 100%. And now it's nothing to start making $1,000 a day. The money's just rolling in. I can buy anything I want. My wife, then, her family's drug addicts. So what do you think happened? Her sister says, you got all this money, we can party. And she gets into drugs really heavy. And me, as long as she wanted to just do that, I supported her habit. But I kept her at a distance that she couldn't do what she wanted. She couldn't get totally OD'd or wiped out. I would tell her, this is how many you're allowed to have. But at the same time, it was her family who asked me to go to a doctor to them. And if you remember the big scandal in Williamson, West Virginia, it was national news. There was doctors there that only took cash. You would pay them like $200 cash for an office visit. It later went up to $300, and they would write you thousands of dollars worth of street value prescriptions. So you get a prescription of Oxycontin, hydrocodone, Xanax, and you get Furosets, and you get like 120 of each. And so you could take that out on the street and had a huge street value. Actually, it started losing its street value. It was so plentiful in Williamson because so many people was going to these doctors. And so these doctors, it's a national story that you can find online. Riker was one of them, and these doctors. And so they asked me to go to the doctor to them, and I did, as you've seen in the video. And I brought back, and they said, just give us the pills. And I wanted brownie points with my new wife's family, so I just gave them the pills. And then I found out they were selling them for thousands of dollars. I didn't really need the thousands of dollars, but human nature, you get greedy, right? The more you can gain, the better. So I realized that I'm not giving them my pills no more. I'm going to start selling them. And that's exactly what I did, and I got met up with another lady that made national news. She run the local strip club, Reva's Tigers, and Reva Jarvis was her name. She ended up dying in prison. And so I started hooking up to where I would just sell everything to Reva and let her make money on it because she was the biggest drug dealer in the area. And so Reva got everything I sold. She used to try to give me free cocaine all the time, but I was too smart for that. I thought that I'm above everybody else. I'm not stupid enough to take these drugs. So I'm going to be smart, and I'm just going to sell it to the dumb people in the world. That was how I felt. I wasn't a Christian. I didn't care for anybody else. Nobody had ever did anything for me. So I sold just to her, and I thought I was smart for that. And then I got a connection to get weed out of North Carolina, and I started selling weed out of my shop. I was making a killing on that. And there's just drugs everywhere, plus tattoo money. I opened a couple more tattoo shops. I hired a bunch of other artists to work for me. I was paying them 50%, which I thought was good because it's better than the 30% I started at. And I'm making 50% of everything they do, and the money's just rolling in. I have everything I could ever want, material-wise, except I just wanted to die. My wife, since I wasn't giving her enough drugs and tried to put a cap on it, started sleeping with men to get drugs. And actually tried suicide. I walked out of my tattoo shop one night with a .45 Beretta. I don't know if you know anything about guns, but a Beretta usually don't misfire. That's the only time I've ever had one misfire. And I stuck the gun to my head, and I pulled the trigger, and it just clicked. And I was so mad at God that I reached up into the sky to fire at him, and it went off. And I carried that shell around, and I cursed God that night, and I told him, how dare you, you won't even let me die, and I said a few other choice words to God. I believed in God, I just didn't have any need for him because my grandfathers were both preachers, and so they taught me about God what they knew, two uneducated old coal miners, that what the best they knew, what they had been taught, they shared that with me. And sometimes that's all you need to share, but all I knew is my life was never good, and I didn't want anything to do with God. So I ended up catching my wife with another man. And I don't know, I always thought if you're going to cheat, at least cheat up. So I caught my wife with the local town drunk, and I was devastated. And here I am alone. We had 3 kids by this time, and I didn't even know that there was multiple affairs before that. I don't know, I just didn't think that would happen. I was kind of blind to it. I was just making all this money, partying all the time. I thought, why would she cheat on me? She has anything she wants. But later I found out that that wasn't the first time. That was like the 100th time. And so it was horrible. And so that time that I caught her, we decided that we would move and try to start over, try to save our marriage, open a tattoo shop somewhere else, and do a whole new beginning. And so we did. We moved to Fort Gay, West Virginia. It's another drug-ridden town, and nothing changed. I still drove back to Williamson to get my pills and sell them and everything. Still tried to control her habit, and just was blind to everything. I was young, dumb, and just blind. And so, anyways, we moved there, and I'm thinking, okay, everything's going to be okay. This is my fault for working so much, not paying attention to her. And so, no, when somebody cheats, it's never your fault. They chose that. They had other choices. They chose that. It's not your fault. But we like to try to take blame. If I'd have did this or if I'd have did that. No, people are going to do what people are going to do. And so, in Fort Gay, I just got fed up, and I left. I left her. I gave her everything we owned, and just left her with my kids. And I knew that with us fighting all the time and everything that was going on, it couldn't be good. So I gave up everything, including the tattoo shop. I left with nothing. I just wanted free. All this time, I still hate God's guts, if you even mention God. And I'll back up a little bit. You know, one time I used to make fun of God because anybody know who Rod Parsley is? He's a TV preacher. Well, I met him once in the streets of Williamson. He's a pretty bold guy, so I respect that from him. He was walking out of a church house that had asked him to come down, and I was walking by to the bank to go deposit money I'd made from the tattoo shop, and he stops me in the street, and he begins to pray for me and tell me all about Jesus, and it was pretty bold because I used to wear cut-off muscle shirts. Here's a dude covered in tattoos packing a pistol, and this preacher stops me. So I'm impressed by that. But anyways, I went back to the shop, and they asked me what happened, and I said, well, I think I just got saved out on the street, just making a joke about it. You know, I said, so I'm saved now. I'm going to heaven. You know, and just joking with my other artists because, you know, in that life it's usually not a Christian environment. So, you know, God was a joke to me. I didn't need him. He never did anything for me, and now I've got all this heartache and betrayal, more pain, more suffering, more not trusting anybody because everybody in my life that I've ever got close to hurt me. And that causes you a lot of psychological problems. So we moved to Fort Gay. I leave, and I knew that I started with nothing. I'll build back. All I need is a job and some money to buy some equipment. I'll start doing tattoos again. I had a good customer base. I'll keep selling my drugs, and we'll do good. So I had some friends that owned a hotel, and they rented me a hotel room for $600 a month. And I thought, this is pretty good. I have no responsibility. I get my bed made every day for me. I get fresh towels. I got internet. I got TV. This is pretty good. I'll just live here in this hotel room. And I can bring and do whatever I want. If I meet a girl, I can bring her right back to my hotel room. And it's a monthly basis. You can't rent a house for that, $600 a month. I'm living with a maid service for $600 a month. So I moved in there, and I got a job at the local Food City. I had tattooed the manager of Food City, so he was happy to give me a job bagging groceries. Here I am, like 30 years old, bagging groceries. And so I think I was like 28 at the time, actually. But anyways, a 28-year-old bag boy. I went from being one of the richest guys around to making $1,000 a day to completely broke bagging groceries to gather up money. Because the drugs had started to dry up during this time. The doctors were all getting arrested, and they wasn't writing as much anymore. So they cut down on the amount they write, and you get about $1,000 a month worth of street value. Plus, you had to pay $300 to see them. So you was only making about $700 profit. And by the time I sold to Ever Who, then I was getting like $500 of profit because I had to take a cut so they could make a little bit of money. So that was just barely covering my hotel room. So I'm happy. I'm going to get this job. I'm going to bag groceries. I'm going to start ordering tattoo equipment, and I'm going to start a tattoo shop. So I'm excited. The first day I walk into work, and I don't know if you've seen like the movies where the light shines down and the angels are singing. Well, there's Rebecca. She's a cashier, my wife now that you've seen, and she's bagging groceries. But to me, all I seen was like a light from heaven and the angels going, hallelujah, 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 you know, like in the movies. And I just looked, and I don't know why, because I never needed God, but I said, God, if you let me have a girl like that, I'll never want another one. Give me that one. And she hated me. She even threw a Reese cup at me once, didn't want anything to do with me. And she didn't feel the same. And she just didn't. They actually accused me of harassing her because the other bag boys realized that I wanted her. And so when I would come in from taking out somebody's groceries or picking up carts, if they were bagging groceries for her, they would just move and let me start bagging her groceries. So persistence, if you ask her, she'll say, he was so persistent. I never seen anybody be so persistent about something. That's kind of my personality. If I want something, I will work at it with everything I have until I achieve that goal. And so she said persistence won me over. And one day they had this thing, which I thought it was a date. She said, I'm going to lunch. You want to go with me? And I thought, yes, this is our first date. She said, it's not a date. We're just going to have lunch. I said, no, it's a date. And she still says to this day it's not a date, but it was a date. And so we went to lunch, and I'm thinking, man, my first date. And then she had some problems in her family. Her family is, mostly drunks and drug addicts, and so she was dating this other guy that she was living with, and they had broken up, and she's staying with her mom, and so she come over and moved in. Well, she knocked on the first door. I think it was the thought of having something that I couldn't have that made it even that something that was out of my reach, because anytime else I could have anything else I wanted, but not this girl. I didn't even get a kiss for 6 months. I was together talking with my buddies, and they were doing that guy talk, sinner talk. How's that girl? How's that going? And I said, I don't have a clue, guys. And they're like, you've been running around with that girl for 6 months and nothing? You're lying to your friends? I said, no, I'm not. I'm telling you the truth. 6 months, I haven't got nothing. I said, I have so much time invested now that there's no way I'm giving up. I hadn't even had a kiss. We just talked every day. And she would come and visit me. And so I knew she was different from all the other girls that I'd dated that jumped right in bed with me. And there was just something different about this girl. So she comes over to the hotel one night. Her mom, I found out, her power went out, and she was running kerosene heaters, and the kerosene was choking her to death, and she had to work the next day, and she needed someplace to sleep. So she knocks on the door, and she says, I'm staying with you. Do not touch me. I had a king-size bed in this room. She said, you stay on that side, I'll stay on this side. So I respected her. I didn't touch her. And so that's, and then the next day she just come again, and that's kind of how we ended up moving in together at first. And then she realized that she didn't want to live in a hotel room. We needed to rent an apartment. And so we rented an apartment. She had some money saved up because she's smarter than I am and not as wasteful as I am. And she always saves money. And so she had money she'd been saving up, and she bought me first tattoo equipment back and financed that, and I was able to quit working at Food City and start doing tattoos out of our apartment. I also knew guys who run gambling machines and poker machines, so we stuck poker machines inside of our apartment and a poker table and started doing illegal gambling. And so here we are living together, and then one night we get a knock on the door, and it's my ex-wife, and she has sold everything we own and had run out of money and run out of drugs, and she says, here's your kids. And I thought, well, this woman's going to leave me now. Here she is, 20 years old. She's not going to take on 3 kids. And my kids were still in diapers. She said, here's their birth certificates, here's their social